let's just jump right in. We're going to explore one of history's biggest, most enduring questions by looking at a specific interpretation of the Bible. The topic, 7 key signs that Jesus is returning, and, well, how they might just be lining up with the world we see all around us today.
It's a question that really gets at this anxiety so many of us feel, right? We're just constantly bombarded by news of global crises. The analysis we're exploring today is going to tackle this head-on, but not with a bunch of modern speculation. Instead, it goes directly back to ancient prophetic texts.
The source material we're looking at today opens with this really powerful statement. It just taps right into that feeling of unease that so many people have. That sense that the world is kind of on edge. This explainer is going to unpack why, according to this perspective, that feeling might be way more significant than we think.
So to really get a grip on these signs, we've got to go way back to where it all started. We're talking 2,000 years ago. Jesus' own disciples asked him, "What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And his answer, which he gave on the Mount of Olives, is what's known as the Olivet Discourse. And that's basically the roadmap for everything we're about to cover.
So what did Jesus actually say? Well, you might be surprised. The very first signs he mentioned weren't some huge cosmic events in the sky. Nope, they were turmoil and confusion right here on Earth. Let's take a look at the very first one. Now, what's so fascinating here is what he leads with. Think about it. Before he even mentions wars or famines or earthquakes, the very first warning sign he gives is about spiritual deception, a time when false prophets and false messiahs would rise up and lead a lot of people astray. And the source material argues that this ancient warning is more relevant now than ever. It points to historical figures, sure, like Jim Jones or David Koresh, but it also points right at our digital age, where literally any voice can get a global platform overnight. The prophecy warned about deception, and here we are, living in the age of misinformation. All right, so the next sign is conflict. And I know what you're probably thinking. Haven't there always been wars? And that's a fair question. The source actually addresses this head-on, arguing that we need to look at the scale and the nature of modern conflict. See, the argument is that it's not just about war itself, but the constant threat of global escalation. You've got nuclear powers in a standoff, proxy wars popping up everywhere. The source even cites UN data showing there are more active armed conflicts right now than at any other time since World War II. It's that potential for total global catastrophe that's presented as the real sign here. Okay, the third sign is actually a trio of things all bundled together: famines, earthquakes, and what the text calls pestilences, which today we'd probably call plagues or pandemics. And when you look around today, the source material draws some pretty direct lines. It points to the World Food Program's reports on hundreds of millions facing food insecurity. Then there's talk about accelerating seismic activity. And of course, the big one we all just lived through, the COVID-19 pandemic, a modern-day pestilence on a global scale. But here's the absolute key to understanding all of this. It's not just that these things are happening. The text uses a really specific metaphor for it: birth pains. The idea is that these signs won't just happen. They'll grow in frequency and in intensity, just like contractions, signaling that a huge climactic event is getting closer and closer. The next sign Jesus talked about, well, it's a tough one. It's deeply personal for his followers. He predicted a time of global hostility, a time when people who believe in him would be handed over to be persecuted and even put to death. And to put that into perspective, to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, the source cites the organization Open Doors, and their numbers are staggering. They report that over 360 million Christians today are living in places with high or even extreme levels of persecution. The argument is that this prophecy is being fulfilled on a massive global scale. Okay, so after all those pretty dark and intense warnings, the prophecy includes one major positive sign. You can think of it as a countersign, a sign of hope that has to be fulfilled before the end. The prophecy is very specific. The message of the gospel has to be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And for most of human history, that just seemed, well, impossible. I mean, how could one message possibly reach every single group of people on the planet? Well, the argument is that our generation is the very first one to see this actually becoming a reality. I mean, think about it. Through scripture translation into thousands of languages, and especially with digital technology, radio, the internet, this message is now reaching nearly every corner of the globe in ways that were totally unimaginable just 100 years ago. All right, so the final set of signs. This is where things shift. We move from these big external global events like wars and earthquakes to something much more internal, something much more personal, the condition of the human heart.
Jesus makes this really interesting comparison. He says the end will be like the days of Noah. And what's so fascinating is that the main characteristic he points to wasn't just, wickedness. It was this kind of willful blindness. People were just so absorbed in their daily lives that they were completely oblivious to the spiritual reality crashing down around them.
And the source draws a direct line from that to today. On one hand, you have the days of Noah, people completely unaware. And on the other, you have our culture today, a culture of endless distraction and entertainment, where the idea of God intervening in history just seems irrelevant to so many, which according to this text is itself a sign. But it gets even more specific. The Apostle Paul, in a letter to his protege Timothy, gave this incredibly detailed profile of what human character would look like in the last days. Let's just go through the list he wrote down almost 2,000 years ago.
He said people would be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy.
Without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, and then this final one that just hits so hard. Lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. The argument from the source is that this reads less like an ancient prophecy and more like a morning news headline.
So, wow. After looking at all of these signs, where does that actually leave us? What's the point of all this? Is it just to speculate and try to predict the future? Well, the source is incredibly clear on this, quoting Jesus himself, "No one knows the day or the hour, not the angels, not even the Son, only the Father." So anyone who tries to set a date is completely missing the point. And that's really the whole idea, isn't it? The signs are not supposed to be a calendar, so we can circle a date. According to this view, they're meant to be an alarm clock. The message isn't figure out the time, it's wake up and be ready. And being ready is so important because, as the source stresses, the second coming is described very differently from the first. He isn't coming back as a quiet, humble servant. This time, he returns in power and glory as King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
And that brings us to the final, lingering question. It kind of turns everything back on us. After looking at all the signs in the world, the final step is to look inward. So the question isn't just, is he coming back, but rather, will you be ready when he does? It leaves you with that one ultimate thought. Are you watching?